I'm Aaron Hale, and I thought midnight shifts at WZRD 96.6 FM would be boring. But when I joined the station, my coworker Lila Trent vanished during a broadcast, and my friend Mark Sawyer heard voices on the air that weren't coming from any human. Now, every night, I hear whispers calling my name, and the station itself feels alive, waiting for me to join whatever is hiding in the static. My name is Aaron Hale, and I had just started working the midnight shift at a tiny radio station called WZRD 96.6 FM. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten by the world, perched alone on the edge of a forest so dense it swallowed every trace of light. The town nearby was barely more than a few streets, quiet and empty after dark. I liked it that way. Solitude made the work bearable, or so I thought. The pay was meager, but there was a strange comfort in being alone, surrounded by the low hum of equipment and the occasional crackle of the transmitter. The building itself was old, walls lined with peeling paint, floors that creaked when I walked, and fluorescent lights that flickered like they were breathing. On the outside, the red light of the broadcast tower pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. The first few nights were dull, almost peaceful. I would sit in the control room, sipping cheap coffee, letting the soft music fill the empty spaces of the building. But as the hours stretched on, I began to notice things. A faint static would creep in between songs, quiet at first, easy to dismiss as interference. Then I started hearing whispers underneath it, almost like someone was speaking just beyond the edge of perception. I told myself it was nothing, the stress and fatigue playing tricks on me. Yet the feeling of being watched began to grow. The shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the room, and every time I glanced at the window that looked out into the dark woods, I thought I saw movement, but whenever I focused, nothing was there. One night, around 2 a.m., the static came louder than usual. It wasn't the crackle of old equipment. It was deliberate. And then, I heard it clearly. My name. Whispered, rasping, and almost playful, like a memory trying to reach me from far away. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the sound had reached the microphone. I leaned closer to the speaker, convinced I was imagining it. But the whisper repeated itself sharper this time. Aaron. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my fingers trembled over the console buttons. I replayed the track, scanning for any hidden frequency or interference. Nothing. Only silence. The forest outside the window was completely black, except for the red glow of the tower. But it didn't pulse anymore. The light blinked once and then went out, leaving the entire area bathed in darkness. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were adjusting or if the light had actually vanished. Then the lights inside the control room flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The speakers roared to life, static filling the room until it was almost deafening. And then, through the noise, came a voice, clear, distorted, and commanding. "Don't leave!" I yanked off my headphones, my ears ringing. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just a trick of the mind. But something deep in my chest told me it wasn't. I could feel the presence before I saw it, like a weight pressing against my back, though no one was there. My reflection in the glass window looked pale, almost lifeless, and the shadows behind me seemed thicker than they should be. I spun around, searching for a person, a figure, anything. Nothing. Just the faint hum of equipment and the oppressive quiet of the building. I tried to focus on work, flipping switches and adjusting the sound levels, but the static returned, now more insistent. It carried under it a rhythm, like breathing, slow and deliberate. I thought I saw a shape moving across the studio, reflected faintly in the window separating the recording booth from the control room. It wasn't human, or at least not entirely human. The outline was blurred, shifting, almost liquid in its motion. I blinked, and it was gone. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. The clock above the console read 2:16 a.m., the same time the first whisper had reached me. I didn't understand what was happening, but a pit of dread had settled in my stomach. The static roared again, louder, and for the first time I felt real fear, not just the creeping unease of isolation. Then, just as abruptly as it started, the room went silent. My heart slowed, but the silence felt heavier, almost alive. And then, through the quiet, I heard it again. Not in the speakers this time, directly in my mind, like someone leaning close to whisper in my ear. "You can't leave." I sat there frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, staring at the darkness beyond the glass. The red light of the tower never returned that night, leaving the forest and the building in complete blackness. Somewhere in that darkness, I knew something was waiting, watching, and listening, and I wasn't sure if it had been waiting for me or if I had walked into something that could never let me go. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had all been a nightmare, a product of exhaustion and the loneliness of the midnight shift. I told myself the whispering voice, the red blinking light, the shadows, they were just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The building felt different now, heavier, as if it was aware I had heard it. Even in the daylight, the peeling paint on the walls seemed darker, the corners of the control room unnaturally sharp. The forest outside still loomed close, dark and dense, as if the trees themselves were pressing against the windows, watching. I returned to my shift that night, hoping to find normalcy, but the air in the control room felt thick, almost tangible, like a storm waiting to break. I tried to focus on the music, cueing songs, adjusting the soundboard, but my ears kept catching something beneath the broadcast. At first it was faint static, easy to dismiss. Then it shifted. I thought I heard faint whispers again, almost pleading, and I realized with a chill that they weren't saying random words. They were crying out, panicked, muffled, impossible to decipher fully. My pulse quickened, and I felt my hands shaking as I reached for the headphones, almost afraid to listen. Something about the station's archives drew me in that night. The basement held reels of old recordings, tapes that were decades old, some dating back before the station was even called WZRD. Most were old promos or music samples, but one tape caught my attention. It was unmarked, wrapped in yellowed tape, with the words "Do not air" scratched into the side. A cold dread ran down my spine as I picked it up. Something about the handwriting made my skin crawl. Against my better judgment, I decided to play it. Static hissed as the tape loaded, the familiar sound of the old machinery grinding to life. At first, nothing happened. Then a faint, trembling voice spoke, a woman's voice, terrified, desperate. She was describing something that had happened the night the signal changed, something she couldn't escape. Her words were fragmented, rushed, almost panicked. Then came a scream, a high-pitched, raw, unbearable scream that seemed to reverberate through the entire studio. I jumped back from the speakers, my ears ringing, my stomach twisting. And then it ended. Dead air. Silence. I wanted to shut everything down, to leave, to run, but something held me in place. The temperature in the room had dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath forming small clouds, even though the heater was running. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to move. Then I noticed the reflection in the recording booth window. A figure was sitting at the microphone facing the wall. It was human-shaped, but its posture was unnatural, stiff, too symmetrical to be comfortable. I froze, and the figure didn't move. It was impossible. No one was scheduled to be here. I leaned closer to the glass, heart hammering, and it slowly turned its head toward me, though I could never see a face. Just a black void where the features should have been. The on-air sign flickered to life. I hadn't touched it. The speakers crackled again, and the static returned, louder than before, almost rhythmic. Then, faintly, a whisper floated through the air. My name, again. But this time it wasn't a single voice. It was multiple voices layered together, repeating, overlapping. They were calling to me, drawing me in, desperate, pleading. My pulse raced, and I stumbled back from the console, tripping over the cables on the floor. The lights flickered violently, throwing the room into sudden blackness, then back into harsh fluorescent glare. I was alone, or I thought I was. A cold, wet sensation brushed my arm, and I recoiled. The hairs on my neck stood straight up. The red light of the tower was visible through the window again, but it wasn't blinking. It was steady, constant, like a warning. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that the station itself wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, and it had been waiting for me to hear the tape. The whispers from the static weren't random. They were instructions, and I had just begun following them, whether I wanted to or not. I wanted to leave, to run into the woods and never look back. But something inside me stopped. It was curiosity, yes, but also a sickening feeling that the station had marked me, that I belonged here now. As I looked back at the recording booth, the figure was gone, but the microphone clicked on by itself, a faint hissing sound emerging, like someone breathing down my neck. I shut the tape off and tried to focus on the normal music playlist. But beneath it all, I could still hear her voice, faint and trembling, repeating the same phrase over and over. They're listening. They've always been listening. And somewhere deep in the building, I could hear a slow, deliberate knock coming from the basement door, as if something or someone was waiting, just for me. After that night, the station no longer felt like a building. It felt like a trap, and I was its only prisoner. Every shift became unbearable. The normal hum of equipment now carried an undertone, a subtle vibration in the air, like something breathing beneath the walls. The static had grown more persistent, more intelligent somehow, and I could swear it was moving through the speakers in patterns, like a language I couldn't fully understand but was slowly learning. Shadows that had once been harmless corners now seemed to shift and stretch toward me, following me wherever I went. Even the glow of the tower seemed to reach into the studio now, casting shapes on the walls that weren't mine. I tried to speak to the other staff about it. They told me I was overworked, that the isolation and late hours were getting to me. But they hadn't heard the whispers, hadn't felt the temperature drop in the middle of the room, hadn't seen the figures sitting in the recording booth staring at the wall. They didn't understand that the building had changed after I heard the tape, as if the history of the station had come alive and was now watching me, waiting for me to make the next mistake. One night, curiosity or madness got the better of me. I decided to check the basement, the place I had first heard the knocks. I went down the narrow staircase, the metal railing cold under my hand. The air smelled damp and decayed, like earth and old smoke. The basement lights flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. I stepped carefully, my shoes echoing on the concrete floor. Then I saw them, scratches on the basement door, deep, claw-like gouges that hadn't been there before. My stomach twisted. The door, which was supposed to be unlocked, resisted my push. I pressed my weight against it, and a faint sound met my ears. Slow, deliberate knocking from the other side. 3 knocks, then silence. I felt drawn back upstairs, but the station wouldn't let me go. The consoles blinked with lights that weren't mine. Buttons pressed themselves, the on-air sign glowing brighter than I'd ever seen. The speakers hissed, and I could hear voices beneath the music, faint, panicked, overlapping. I realized, as I leaned closer to the soundboard, that these were the same voices from the tape. Thousands of them, layered into a constant overlapping scream that I couldn't escape. I grabbed the microphone to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a voice that sounded like me, but deeper, distorted, emerged from the speakers. "You shouldn't be here alone." I stumbled back into the control room, my mind spinning. The monitors flickered, showing impossible images. I was standing there in the room, yet on the screens I could see myself sitting at the microphone, my hands operating controls I didn't touch. And the other me was not me, at least not entirely. The face was shadowed, black where features should be. Eyes too dark, too empty. I couldn't look away, though every instinct screamed for me to run. The static filled the room, vibrating in my chest like a heartbeat. Louder, faster, impossible to ignore. Then came the whispering again. This time, my name was joined by others, repeating the same words in 1,000 overlapping tones. You are not the only one here. You're not the only one. I couldn't breathe. I fell to my knees, hands pressed to my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It was in my skull, crawling under my skin. The station was alive. The building itself, the walls, the equipment, everything was listening, waiting, feeding. And somehow I knew it wanted me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. I heard movement in the hallways, the slow dragging of feet, the scraping of nails along walls. Cameras I hadn't turned on flickered to life, showing grainy images of shapes moving in impossible ways, bending and twisting in the shadows. I felt them close, behind me, over my shoulder, inside my thoughts. When I dared to look at the recording booth again, the figure was there, staring at the wall, motionless, yet somehow radiating intent. I didn't know if it was human or something far older, something the station had trapped, something it was now offering me a glimpse of. My legs moved on their own, bringing me closer to the microphone. I didn't want to go, but a sick curiosity compelled me. The speakers buzzed, and through the static came a single coherent sentence that froze me in place. You started this. Now you can't stop it. I realized then that whatever haunted the station wasn't a T just content to exist in the tapes or the static. It was alive, patient, intelligent, and it had chosen me. And every whisper, every shadow, every flicker of the lights was a reminder. I belonged here now. I tried to speak, to leave, to break the hold, but my voice betrayed me, coming out through the speakers, saying things I had not said. The red light of the tower blazed above, visible through the window, casting long, grotesque shadows that pressed against me like hands. And as the static roared once more, I finally understood that the station didn't just broadcast music. It broadcast something darker, something alive, and I had become part of the signal. The whispers intensified, 1,000 voices screaming my name, promising that I would never escape. Somewhere in the basement, something scratched at the walls, waiting, patient, unseen. I was trapped, but the worst part was knowing the station had only begun. After the night in the basement, I no longer felt like a human being in control of my actions. The station had claimed me, or at least my presence. Each night, the walls seemed to breathe with a life of their own, the static in the speakers shifting like a heartbeat I could feel in my chest. Shadows moved without light, slipping across the floor and climbing the walls. Every time I glanced at the monitors, the images were wrong, somehow familiar yet twisted, like reflections of a world I didn't belong to. My reflection in the recording booth glass looked pale, hollow-eyed, a version of me I didn't recognize, yet somehow it watched me with intent. I began to dread the hours before dawn, when the building seemed hungriest, when the whispers grew frantic, almost impatient. I tried to leave that night. I packed a small bag, shoved it over my shoulder, and walked toward the exit. The air was colder than usual, each breath visible and heavy, like I was wading through water. The emergency lights flickered on as I reached the door, bathing the hallway in an unnatural, pulsating red. The speakers crackled, and I could hear the tape's voice again. The woman, terrified, whispering, "Don't turn it off!" My heart slammed against my ribcage, but I pressed forward, ignoring the impossible pull of the voice. The monitors in the control room flared to life all at once, every single one. And every camera was showing me. Not just me, but me at the microphone, my hands moving, my face calm and collected, though my real body was frozen in panic. The image on the screens moved independently, yet mimicked me, an imitation that was wrong. The face was shadowed, features blurred, eyes deep and dark as if the life had been drained from them. And the voice. It wasn't mine. It was mine, but warped, mechanical, echoing through the speakers. "You started the broadcast. You can't stop it." I stumbled back, tripping over cables and falling against the wall. The building's lights flickered violently, and the static roared, filling every corner of the room with a deafening, vibrating hum. The temperature dropped further, the sweat freezing on my skin as I realized the station had become a machine, a living entity, and I was the fuel. I wanted to scream, but when I opened my mouth, only static came out, the same distorted voice repeating my name over and over, faster, urgent, insistent. I looked toward the recording booth and saw the figure again, staring at the wall, unmoving, yet radiating a force I could feel in my chest. Something deep in me knew that this entity wasn't bound by human rules. It could reach into the very signal, into the frequencies, into my mind. I could hear the voices again through the speakers, hundreds, maybe thousands, overlapping in a single desperate chorus. They spoke in fragments, repeating, "Join us. Join us. Never leave. Never leave." I could feel them pressing into my thoughts, trying to pull me toward the microphone, toward the red light that now seemed to dominate the room. I tried to fight it. I tried to reach the door to escape, but the building refused. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, closing in. The tower outside pulsed, its red light cutting into the darkness, and I felt like I was standing in the center of some living organism. I could hear scratching from the basement, sharp, deliberate, moving closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs were led, as though the station itself was controlling me. Then the microphone clicked on by itself. The speakers hummed, and through the static came my voice. Calm, steady, terrifyingly familiar. But I hadn't spoken. The words that came out were promises, warnings, invitations, all at once. "Welcome to the broadcast. You can never leave." My chest tightened. I could feel the building surrounding me, pressing against me, whispering, feeding. I fell to my knees, my hands clawing at the floor, my ears ringing with the millions of whispers and cries and distant screams. I realized then that the station didn't just broadcast music anymore. It broadcast something far older, something alive. The entity was patient, watching through the cameras, listening through the static, waiting for me to understand. And now I did. I understood that leaving wasn't an option. The basement scratches, the flickering lights, the distorted voices, they were warnings. I had been warned too late. Somewhere in the shadows, something moved, brushing against the walls, scraping nails, and the red light of the tower suddenly blazed brighter, like an eye opening. I could hear it breathing through the vents, a low, deliberate, omnipresent sound matching the rhythm of my own panicked heartbeat. And then, as the whispers reached a crescendo, I noticed the monitors again. They showed me, but not me. Another version of myself, trapped behind the glass, trapped in the microphone, trapped in the broadcast. And it was smiling. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The building had me, but the worst part was knowing it had been waiting for someone like me all along. The voices, the static, the figure in the booth, the red light, all of it had been patient, calculating, and inevitable. And somewhere in that relentless, alive, breathing station, I could feel the final truth taking shape. This was no longer my world. I was part of the broadcast now, a signal feeding the static, a whisper among the millions, trapped forever. I don't remember leaving the station that night. One moment I was on my knees, pressed against the floor of the control room, the monitors flickering with images of myself that shouldn't have existed, and the next, I woke up at home. My headset was still around my neck, the faint hiss of static buzzing through it like a living thing. The room was quiet, or at least it seemed quiet, but the moment I touched the headset, the whispers returned, soft, persistent, and urgent, as if the voices had followed me home. My hands shook as I tried to rip it off, but I couldn't. It was like it had fused to me, part of my body, part of the signal. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the station's music, slowed down and warped, layered with whispers and distant screams. It was inescapable, crawling into my dreams, twisting them, leaving me drenched in sweat and terror. I tried to call the station, tried to reach anyone who could tell me I was imagining things, but the phone lines were dead. Static hissed back at me instead of a dial tone. I even drove out to the station during the day, hoping the sun would make it feel normal again, but when I arrived, it was abandoned, silent, coated in dust and neglect. The windows were dark and empty, the doors locked tight. It had been months since anyone had worked there. Or so I thought. I began hearing reports from other people, strange, scattered calls from listeners. They said they were tuning into 96.6 FM, even though the station was supposed to be shut down. Some claimed they heard whispers between songs, voices crying out for help. Others said they heard me reading news updates that never aired, my voice calm and clear, though I hadn't been there. One caller told me they could hear the faint sound of a woman screaming over the static. Another said the microphone clicked on by itself, and a shadowy figure appeared in the studio, only to vanish when the lights flickered. I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the station had not stopped. It had only changed. The signal, the building, whatever had lived in the basement, and whispered in the static. They weren't confined by walls, by time, or by distance. Somehow it had spread, and I was part of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it pulling me back, calling me home to the control room I could no longer enter. One night I couldn't resist. I drove back out there, the headlights cutting through the dense forest. The air was heavy, still, and the tower loomed ahead, dark and silent. Or so it seemed. As I stepped out of the car, the emergency lights inside flickered on, bathing the building in that same pulsating red glow. The on-air sign blazed. The door to the control room creaked open, though no one was inside. I felt a pull, strong and insistent, drawing me inside. The room was empty, but the monitors were on, each one displaying a version of me at the microphone. Calm, smiling, speaking words I hadn't said, and yet the voice was unmistakably mine, distorted and warped, echoing through the speakers. "Welcome back to WZRD 96.6 FM. We've been waiting for you." My stomach twisted. I backed away, but the building seemed to stretch, the walls bending, the floorboards groaning beneath some invisible weight. Static filled the room, growing louder, vibrating in my chest until it felt like my ribcage would shatter. Then I heard it. From somewhere deep in the speakers, beneath the music, beneath the static, a multitude of voices whispered my name. Hundreds, thousands, layered into a single horrifying chorus. And then one voice, unmistakable, separate from all the others, clear, commanding. "You can't leave. You belong here now." The recording booth door slowly creaked open. Inside, a figure sat at the microphone, shadowed, featureless, yet unmistakably human-shaped. It turned toward me, and for a second I thought it was me. No, it was me. But not quite. Its eyes were black voids, its smile too wide, too calm, too welcoming. It leaned toward the microphone, and the speakers crackled again, my voice reading a news update I had never prepared, delivering words I hadn't written. I stumbled backward, my mind spinning. The tower outside pulsed brighter than ever, the red light piercing the darkness of the forest. The whispers filled the air, pressing into my thoughts, promising, threatening, waiting. I realized then that I had never left. The station had followed me, or perhaps I had never escaped its grasp. Every listener who reported strange voices was part of the signal now, part of the broadcast that refused to die. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I was being pulled back again. Another whisper, another scream, another broadcast waiting to claim me fully. I tried to run, but the building seemed infinite, stretching and folding into itself. The microphone clicked on by itself. My distorted voice filled the room. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that moment, I understood the horrifying truth. The station didn't just haunt the living, it consumed them. It never stopped. It never would. Somewhere, far beyond the frequencies, I could hear hundreds of voices layered beneath mine, screaming, crying, pleading, trapped forever in the static. And as I backed away into the shadows, I felt the pull stronger than ever, dragging me back toward the microphone, toward the tower, toward the endless broadcast. I knew I would never escape.